We are counting down 10 moments captured on live television, in interviews, and in official documents where Jimmy Saville's behavior was openly visible to the public, yet was laughed off, ignored, or actively suppressed. From studio audiences to hospital boardrooms, each entry escalates in severity, building toward a final official verdict that confirmed decades of institutional failure. Some of these moments were watched by millions. Not one triggered a consequence. Number 10 takes us back to a 1976 BBC studio broadcast. In 10th place, a live broadcast of Top of the Pops in May 1976 captured a moment that would later become chilling evidence. As the cameras rolled, Jimmy Saville placed his hand up the skirt of 18-year-old audience member Sylvia Edwards. The gesture, visible on national television, drew no reaction from the production crew or the crowd. Edwards, a hired dancer, later described feeling frozen and powerless, recalling that staff told her to go away when she tried to speak up. At the time, there was no complaint logged, no investigation, and no acknowledgement from the BBC. The footage was archived, untouched, for decades. Only after Saville's death did Edwards come forward, her account matching the silent images that had always been there in the BBC vaults. This moment, normalized as eccentricity or backstage banter, set a precedent for silence. It marked the earliest public breach, one that played out in front of millions, yet disappeared into the background of entertainment, unchallenged and unresolved. Number 9. A 1978 episode of Jim'll Fix It features 14-year-old Julie Fernandez, whose childhood wish brought her onto the set and into direct contact with Jimmy Saville. The segment, broadcast on BBC One, shows Saville presenting Fernandez with a medal and arranging a day out at a fairground ride. What appears on screen as a moment of kindness is haunted by Fernandez's later account. Decades after the broadcast, she revealed that Saville touched her inappropriately during filming. At the time, no complaint was made. No chaperone was assigned, and production files confirm that safeguarding policies were not in place for child participants. The Fix-It request form, signed by her guardian, highlights the trust placed in the show and its host. When Fernandez spoke out in 2012, her experience became part of the BBC's official review, exposing how children's programming enabled unsupervised proximity between celebrity and minor. The absence of any internal record or investigation in 1978 stands as a stark reminder. Child safety was left to chance, and warning signs were brushed aside in the glow of prime-time entertainment. 8th place, a backstage clip from Jim'll Fix It in 1976 captures a casual exchange that now feels deeply unsettling. The footage, resurfaced decades later, shows Jimmy Saville and guest Rolf Harris mingling with children and crew behind the scenes. In the brief sequence, Saville teases Harris in front of a young girl while adults and staff look on, unfazed. The camera logs from that day mark this as a routine backstage moment. No alarm, no raised eyebrows, just familiar banter between two television personalities. Yet the relaxed atmosphere reveals a permissive culture, where boundaries were blurred and unsupervised access was the norm. There is no sign of chaperones or safeguarding, even as the camera lingers on children moving freely among adults. The fact that this scene was filmed, archived, and later broadcast without comment underscores how commonplace such environments had become. What once passed as harmless camaraderie now reads as evidence of unchecked proximity and institutional complacency, a glimpse into the private spaces where warning signs went unnoticed, even when the cameras were rolling. Number 7. A 1998 regional television interview captures Jimmy Saville making a declaration that now reads as a warning, not a boast. On BBC South, Saville grins as he tells the presenter that he has a key to every ward at Stoke Mandeville and that he is welcome wherever he goes. The statement lands as a punchline, drawing admiration from the interviewer and later repetition in local press articles. At the time, this was celebrated as evidence of his tireless charity work and unique rapport with hospital staff. The keys themselves, physical symbols of trust, were never questioned. Instead, the narrative of the celebrity benefactor was amplified, with Saville's access described as proof of his selfless dedication. No one asked why a television personality needed unrestricted entry to wards, or what it meant for patient safety. The hospital's own staff echoed the public narrative, and the BBC aired the claim without scrutiny. Decades later, access logs and internal correspondence would confirm that Saville's keys were not just honorary. They granted him unsupervised movement through some of the NHS's most sensitive spaces. But in 1998, the boast was met with applause, not alarm, a moment that reveals how institutional privilege can be paraded in plain sight, and how power, once granted, is rarely questioned until it is far too late. Number 6. The 2000 interview with Louis Theroux offers a revealing look at Jimmy Saville's ability to sidestep scrutiny even when questions land close to home. Throughout the BBC documentary, Theroux presses Saville on his personal life, asking directly about relationships, friendships, and rumors that have swirled around him for decades. Each time, Saville responds with a practiced blend of jokes, evasions, and abrupt changes of subject. When asked how he gets away with it, Saville flashes a smile and insists he is simply a good bloke. Probing further about his lack of close relationships, he deflects with laughter, calling himself a very private person and steering the conversation back to his charity work. Even pointed questions about his reputation are met with glib one-liners or a sudden shift to talking about marathons and fundraising. The interview aired without any follow-up from the BBC, and at the time, Saville's defensive tactics were dismissed as quirks of an eccentric celebrity. In retrospect, these exchanges now read as a masterclass in rhetorical self-protection, a public figure using humor and ambiguity as a shield. The 2016 revisit by Theroux, after the extent of Saville's abuse was known, underscores just how effectively these tactics masked deeper truths. The pattern of verbal deflection seen here would echo in later moments of outright denial and institutional silence. Number 5. The 2006 BBC Newsnight investigation marked a turning point, not in public understanding, but in institutional response. Journalists at the BBC flagship current affairs program spent months preparing a detailed report on allegations against Jimmy Saville. Survivors had begun to come forward, and the team gathered credible testimonies alongside mounting circumstantial evidence. Yet, just as the story neared broadcast, senior editors intervened. Internal memos from the period cite editorial reasons for shelving the report, but later disclosures reveal a more complex calculus, including concerns about Saville's reputation, the risk of legal action, and the absence of a criminal conviction. The decision came from the top, overriding the newsroom's investigative momentum. The Guardian would later publish excerpts from these memos, confirming that the BBC's own journalists felt stymied and frustrated. This was not a passive oversight or a failure to notice. It was an active choice to suppress information, justified at the time as caution, but, in retrospect, a clear instance of gatekeeping. The dropped investigation left allegations unexamined and allowed Saville to maintain his public persona for years to come. In the context of the countdown, this moment exposes not just an individual's evasion, but a system's willingness to look away, transforming institutional silence into complicity. In 2006, a televised interview with Jimmy Saville marked a critical inflection point in his public defense. On BBC Two's Newsnight, Saville faced a national audience and delivered an unequivocal denial. He said, "I have never harmed a child." The statement, broadcast in prime time, came at a moment when survivors had already begun reaching out to journalists and advocacy groups, their accounts circulating quietly behind the scenes. Yet, on air, Saville's words went unchallenged. The interviewer moved on without pressing further, and the segment concluded with Saville's reputation untouched. Contemporary UK press coverage reported the denial as a definitive answer, reinforcing the narrative of an eccentric but harmless celebrity. For viewers, the effect was immediate. Any lingering rumors seemed quashed by the force of his televised insistence. Behind closed doors, however, producers and reporters were already fielding credible allegations, creating a widening gap between what was known privately and what was accepted publicly. The interview's aftermath reveals the power of celebrity denial when amplified by institutional platforms. Survivors who watched that night saw their own stories erased in real time, while the BBC editorial decision to air the denial without challenge signaled to the public that there was nothing to question. In retrospect, this moment stands as a stark illustration of how visible assertions of innocence, when left untested, can deepen a culture of silence and allow abuse to persist in plain sight. Number 3. A 2012 disclosure by a former Jim'll Fix It producer revealed a chilling behind-the-scenes reality. In a BBC News interview, the producer described an unwritten rule on set. Staff were told, quietly but firmly, never to leave Jimmy Saville alone with children. This advice circulated as informal wisdom, not as official policy. Production memos from the era reference this guidance in passing, couched in language that suggests staff were uneasy but felt powerless to escalate concerns. No formal safeguarding procedures were introduced, and the chain of command did not act on the warning. The producer's statement, made after Saville's death, confirmed that risk was recognized and discussed among crew, yet remained confined to whispers and hallway conversations. BBC's own records show no evidence of any disciplinary action, policy change, or report filed as a result of these warnings. At the time, the absence of a written complaint allowed the institution to maintain plausible deniability. The warning became a kind of open secret, acknowledged but never addressed in any meaningful way. This episode stands apart from earlier moments of public denial by exposing a layer of internal alarm that was not just missed, but actively ignored. The lack of response from management, even when staff voiced concern, reveals how institutional inertia can neutralize even the clearest signs of danger. The producer's testimony, delivered decades after the fact, forces a reconsideration of what accountability should have looked like and how a culture of informal warnings enabled the cycle to continue, unbroken, behind the camera. Number 2. The paper trail at Stoke Mandeville Hospital lays bare the extent of formal institutional permission granted to Jimmy Saville. In 1994, the hospital's property committee approved a lease for a private flat on the grounds, with an annual value of £25,000. The rent was soon waived, making the flat a permanent, cost-free base for Saville's visits. Minutes from board meetings confirm the arrangement, signed off by senior executives and justified as a reward for his fundraising. The flat's proximity to patient wards was not incidental. It was central to the access he enjoyed. Further evidence comes from the ward key register, maintained between 1995 and 2008. Saville's name appears as a key holder for the children's ward, noted as provided per volunteer porter agreement and countersigned by the ward sister. The register documents years of unrestricted entry with no requirement to sign in or out. These records are not anecdotal or reconstructed from memory. They are original documents, preserved in the hospital's own files. Unlike earlier moments built on testimony or recollection, the lease contracts and key logs stand as incontrovertible proof that Saville's access was not just tolerated, but actively enabled by hospital administration. The signatures, dates, and committee approvals reveal a system that formalized his privilege, insulating him from oversight. This level of documented endorsement provided the perfect cover for abuse, embedding Saville's presence into the institution's daily routine. The implications are stark. When access is granted on paper, denial becomes almost impossible, and the line between charity and complicity is erased. And finally, in first place, the 2016 Dame Janet Smith Review delivers the most comprehensive and damning verdict on decades of institutional failure. This independent inquiry, commissioned by the BBC after Saville's death, sifted through thousands of documents, testimonies, and internal records. The review identified more than 200 complaints about Saville's behavior, complaints that were dismissed, ignored, or buried by the very organizations meant to protect the vulnerable. The report's executive summary lays out a pattern. Allegations spanning hospitals, television studios, and charities were rarely recorded, often minimized, and almost never followed up with meaningful action. The BBC, NHS trusts, and police are all cited for collusion, sometimes through active denial, sometimes through a culture of deference to celebrity. The review's findings confirm what each previous moment in this countdown has foreshadowed. Warning signs were not just missed, they were systematically erased. The statistics are stark. Over 200 separate accounts, some raised repeatedly over decades, failed to trigger a single effective intervention. The review details how staff concerns were routinely dismissed, how survivors were left unsupported, and how institutional priorities skewed towards reputation management rather than safeguarding. Policy recommendations stretch across every level of the organizations involved, calling for independent oversight, robust reporting mechanisms, and a wholesale change in how complaints are handled. The report's conclusion is unmistakable. Jimmy Saville's predatory conduct was not hidden in shadows. It was played out in full view, shielded by institutional indifference and the myth of celebrity benevolence. As the countdown closes, the Dame Janet Smith Review stands as the final authoritative synthesis. Every archived clip, every survivor's testimony, every missed opportunity for intervention is drawn together in a single official record. The review's legacy is a call to vigilance. Silence and inaction are not neutral. They are active agents in the perpetuation of abuse. For those seeking support or information, resources from the NSPCC and other survivor organizations are available. The evidence is now public, and the responsibility to act on it belongs to everyone. Across all 10 moments, one pattern stands out. Visibility didn't guarantee accountability. Institutions and audiences saw the signs, on camera, in documents, in plain sight, but chose comfort over confrontation. That disconnect isn't just history, it's a warning about how image can blind us to harm. The cost of ignoring what's visible is paid by those least able to speak. Let's not repeat that silence.